Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Lab with Dr. Khalid, with me, our co-host, and myself, Dr. Abdul Haqq Baker. So, Dr. Khalid, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakum Allah, and it's a pleasure to be back on the doctor's lab as usual.
Yes, likewise, mashallah. And the last one was short. This one's going to be slightly short, I think, as we adjust to the timings. And I think that we're doing half an hour today because Maghrib comes in where I am in the UK at 8:10. And I think that within the next 2 weeks, we may be able to keep it at the same time or resume the time of 8 o'clock, inshallah, or thereabouts, and then go for the hour session, and if need be, sometimes the hour and a half session. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to do that. So today, wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh, jazakallah khair. Good to see brothers, sisters joining us today. Any non-Muslims who are interested in engaging and listening to two doctors, brothers, Salafi, on issues that are relevant and pertaining to us, our environments, our societal climes in this particular era. And Khalid, I felt that we should do a part two as we agreed 2 weeks ago. And before we jump into the focus of this particular episode, there were two or a few comments that we saw from the previous weeks, which were quite constructive, even though they were critical. And I want to address those. I did address them in the YouTube link, and our viewers can go and look at those. But there were criticisms about why we left to go to the land of the Muslims, and they were quite damning in our discussing, particularly me, returning to the West, to the UK. And one of the comments was that, oh, you returned because Saudi had no use for you anymore, and they sent you back to the West. And that there was another comment within that same commentary about abandoning our communities. So I addressed that, and alhamdulillah, I don't mind criticism, but if it's valid, I will accept it. If I feel that it needs to be challenged, then I will do so. And as you know, that didn't happen whatsoever with yourself or with myself in leaving the Middle East, leaving Saudi Arabia. Now, from my perspective, you have to look at opportunities that are there, that present themselves, and many of us worked out there. You studied, mashallah, and worked alongside that as well.
Yeah,
now, moving between jobs and better opportunities to establish stability for your family is not a new thing, as we know. So, for example, leaving Saudi Arabia, I only gave up my Iqama. I remember I left Saudi Arabia 2 years ago. To go to Dubai. I gave up my Iqama a month ago. A month ago. Okay.
Your residency permit.
Yeah,
wow.
My residency permit. And that wasn't me being forced. Okay, it was coming to expire. I had to look and weigh up things, and I thought I'm not going. And there's a new rule: if your travel visa, you haven't been back in the country within 6 months, then that gets frozen. So I thought I'm not going to go through the rigmarole to renew my Iqama and the cost and expense when I know I'm not going to be going backwards and forwards there. And with the new rules now, with the 3 months, 6 months visitors visas and everything, it's just a lot easier. You can land in the airport if you're from the West and get your visa. So why would I hold on to an Iqama in that instance? So for me, moving across to Dubai as well, there was a new opportunity there, and that was a direction of travel that my wife and I had agreed on maybe 2015, when we said, look, we're going to have to return to the West at some point, not through compulsion, but we were meant to go for 2 years, then 5 years, it became 20 years. And I'm bringing this out for individuals to hear this, because to say, oh, you were pushed out, everything, and then as I explained, and I'm not defending myself, I want to give a context that some of us had the opportunity to go back. As you know, I came back in November, end of November, beginning of January. I was offered a lucrative position in January, and I rejected it, okay, because I felt now's the time to be back here in the UK, children grown, other aspects to look at here in that sense, mashallah. Wa alaikum salam, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I and Mike, welcome. So I think one of the things that I see, Khalid, and I'll end on that sort of, it seems like I'm defending myself. There's nothing to defend, because there just isn't anything to defend. But it's that harshness that we have in critiquing and commenting on others' decisions, choices, lives, almost as though there's a bitterness that we departed and took a trajectory that was beneficial for us. Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara, save yourselves
No.
and your families. To save yourselves and your families. It doesn't say communities and everything else. It's as though there's a underlying bitterness in some of the criticisms that we give each other as Muslims. And I dare say Salafis are the most vitriolic that I know. I'm a Salafi, and I've seen it. And I was once a part of that in the early 90s with that overzealousness, thinking it was within its context. And it wasn't when we learn more from the ulama. But that's a problem that we have. And I'll throw it over to you from the point of, is that part of the problem? And for that contributes to the dysfunctionality of our communities, the progressiveness of our communities, the resilience of our communities. That critiquing, that vitriol that doesn't allow leadership to be identified or to flourish.
That's a deep question right there. Allah yubarak fikum. So yeah, no doubt. Being zealous in our critiques and hyperbolic in our language. So this is actually relevant to something myself and our brother Talib we discussed this morning. So some recent clips. So this is more related to the dawah, but it has the overall implications for us cooperating in the West and thriving in communities, obviously. So even on the micro level, between du'at, okay, between callers to Islam that are on the same methodology, they have the same scholars, the same what have you. You will find that when the manners for refuting one another, likewise, the manners of some of the students themselves in sort of not knowing their level. This is one of the things where it opens the door. Is sometimes we, mashallah, there's brothers, they have different levels of knowledge. There's some people that they studied for many years. They studied, graduated from here, graduated from there. They have high levels of knowledge and maybe less experience. Sometimes some of these guys are very young. So when you're youthful, and even if you have knowledge, I think there's so much to be said. And we talked about this, our last doctor's lab, about the importance of attaching to those elders with that experience. So what you have is you have some graduates and some brothers who have knowledge, have a lot of knowledge to offer, but some of the wisdom is not there. And
Right.
one of the things I see where du'ats will make mistakes is they will answer every question. Okay, and it's what I feel when I hear some of the problems and mistakes that come through me through cyberspace, that so and so said this, instead so and so did this, he said this about this, he said this, a lot of times because they answer questions that are above their pay grade, meaning that they step outside of the boundaries where it would be safer for them to at least think about their answers and maybe answer, say Allahu alam, answer it at another time, or ask Ahl dhikr, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Fas'al ahla dhikr in kuntum la ta'lamun," ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. On the other hand, then the way the people deal with the mistakes of one another, and I wrote a whole chapter about this in my book, my a subsection on how Salafi should deal with one another, based according to books of Salafi scholars, um, is that there's a lack of, there's no leeway, there's no husnudhan, there's no like having a positive outlook and a positive way of construing what someone said. So they could say, oh, Dr. Abdul Haqq Baker said this, boom. Next thing they're making takfir of you. You've left the fold of Islam. It was totally taken out of context. No, he was talking about fruits he bought in the souk. He bought it in the marketplace. He wasn't saying this about people, whatever. People take things out of context all the time, and they use hyperbolic language to describe what was being said out of context. And so this is showing a lack of being able to cooperate and how they deal with one another. Obviously, this undermines community in totality, because if this is between the people of Ahl Sunnah, the students of knowledge of Ahl Sunnah, and their role in their communities from of leading as far as in religious affairs and matters. If they're having discord and disharmony over petty things sometimes, then obviously the rest of the community is going to be in a loss, you know? Yeah, and you can see the
Right.
effect.
Yes.
And a
And I
last
think
quick point, a quick
yes.
example. I gave a khutbah a couple of weeks ago, and a brother from I think he's Oromo, one of the Ethiopian tribes, main tribes there. He came up to me, he said, "Jazakallah khairan, I enjoyed the khutbah and so forth." And he said, we need to hear more like this about our problems because we're losing our children, this and that and the other. Not basically he was saying not refuting one another, and I was actually kind of surprised because I don't know really what's in Seattle. I don't see it. It's nothing like many of other cities because most of our students of knowledge are from like Somalia and Ethiopia and Cham, Cambodia and stuff like this. We don't have necessarily the same problems you would have in Philly or New Jersey or some other communities. So anyway, the point is this learning how to deal with one another. We have to learn how to deal with differences and deal with it according to the shara, the mizan of shara, the way the scale of the sharia.
Now,
Now,
no, Zafar Khalid, very, very pertinent points that you've made there. And I would go one step further to say that, and you and I again have discussed aspects of this, but not within the context or focus that we're looking at this particular point now. Not all graduates, as we know, are leaders.
no,
And I think that there's been a problem in that the communities have had expectations, misplaced expectations, that when the Tulab came back from studying abroad, that they would teach and lead. And this was a mistake. And we've seen that those who came back and then tried to adopt both mantles of teaching and leadership became, I think, distracted by particular elements of leadership, but used elements of what they had learnt and the ulama that they'd built relationships with to support and protect the leadership structures that they had stepped into.
mm,
And this became part of the problem. We had scholars giving decisions. We know some of the scholars, I'm not shy to say, some of our scholars, Sheikh Mohammed bin Hadi, who's no longer scholars for a number of individuals, we won't go into that, Sheikh Rabi', other shuyukh, making decisions as to, even back into the early noughties, when we had the big fitna with Abdul Hassan and everything like that, making decisions on who should stay in position and who should not stay in the position. And you've not seen that take place anywhere, especially in the UK, if I can look from that perspective, in other communities, non-Salafi denominations, other communities in that respect. That again was problematical, or it's problematic, because the politics of the East were then transferred to those of the West. And the battles that we saw taking place that made communities become stagnated. Brixton was one of them. I was the chairman at the time and was trying to push away again from that. Stagnation took place because we were not looking what was right under our noses regarding our children, regarding societal changes, regarding building institutions, education, businesses, and the like. And what would replace what we should have been focusing on was what was yonder, what was beyond our borders, across the seas, of what was taking place amongst the scholars. Now, we've spoken about that before, but coming back to the brothers and sisters who went away to study, brothers in particular, placing individuals who do not have the capacity for leadership into leadership positions due to the pressure of the community, because he's a graduate, he's coming back, I feel has stunted the growth of particular communities in the West. Hence, we don't see a resilience. We do not see a resilience. And then we saw, looking at the khutbah that you said you gave, and that the brother coming to you afterwards and saying Jazakallah khair, you see that even now, 20 odd years on, the fault lines are drawn amongst particular communities as to who they should take knowledge from, where they should take knowledge from, which scholar they should be listening to. And again, I say, when you juxtapose that with the wider Muslim populace, you'll see that particular communities, Salafi communities to be specific, have not progressed. I can say that about Brixton, looking at all of the development that has taken place around Brixton. Alhamdulillah, we've got Medina College now, which is not a part of Brixton. When we look at other communities that have emerged within the square mile, 2 miles, 3 miles from Brixton, when we look in other towns, Luton, now there's a dispute taking place because they're trying to open up another masjid after disputes internally with the one Salafi masjid they had there. This is a problem, Khalid, because if we don't want to look at ourselves and say, well, no, we are on the Haqq and we've got to go through all of this, as you said, the individual said to you, we are losing our children. And if we were to sit from outside in and had parents going through that for generations, Allah knows best what our take on it would have been at the time. So that point is really important that I want to speak to. You can have a leader who has leadership skills, who has academic qualifications, who has business acumen, who has interpersonal skills where the people embrace. And you can have Talib al-Ilm who's graduated as an imam, focusing on the ilmi aspects, but the ilm that is required by the community. As you said, remember 2 weeks ago, you said we need to be having classes so the youth and the people who are just coming to Jummah can understand their deen, Tawheed, the Sunnah, within the context of how to apply within their society. But if you've got someone who needs to keep their job because they've only studied as an imam, okay, and the leadership post is the only one that's actually there, or if they're not a leader, they've got to hold on to their imam position because they're not qualified to go and work anywhere else or do anything else except menial tasks, and that any job is meritorious depending on your attitude and your input to it, then it's, and there's no, and the last bit I throw into that is there's a lack of support financially from the community to maintain that individual who's come to teach them, to maintain the individual who they want to lead and to dedicate full-time leadership to the community. That absence of support from the community financially and otherwise means that that community is set up to fail, to stagnate, or to bring less qualified, because we have that problem as well. Those who are less qualified, they haven't studied fully, but they see that it seems an easy route to take to become a student of knowledge, meaning that I'm going to read the books, I'm going to get into everything, I'm going to do that, speak some Arabic, wear the thobe, and then at least I can debate and argue with others who are business minded, academically minded, and maybe don't know as much as me from my book knowledge. And so therefore it's an easy route for me to get into that position of leadership. And once I'm in, because I don't have any other qualifications, because I do not have any other abilities or skills, I'm going to hold on to that for dear life and end up using the minbar as a platform to chastise anyone who criticizes. All of that has been taking place, Khalid, to varying degrees.
Mm-hmm. Allah musta'an. Yeah, these are issues where the communities themselves will have to determine, what the role of an imam. I think there's around, it seems like there are more, there's a reassessment of these things. And as someone is saying, that's the key. Community funding churches have provided housing and salary for their priests in the UK. Yeah, in America, obviously we don't want those models of the mega churches and all this stuff like this and the wealthy priests and this and that and the other. But there does need to be um, your du'at. If you want them to teach and you want the community to be active in the knowledge, there does need to be support. This is the bottom line. So this is coming into another thing, not just the roles of what those imams, and as you said, bringing together those various skills. We need that collectively for leading a community. You need the business-minded people. You need the people who are savvy with their communication skills and so forth, as well as the imam for the religious verdicts and that those aspects. And funding is huge. And I think in the West in general, and I think the UK, without having been there or stayed there or anything like this, I think is better than a lot of our communities in America. Um, and especially probably Salafi communities and so forth. And Allah knows best. But we have some of the communities they realize, but they're blessed. They have the money. For example, in certain areas here in Washington State, you have the tech worker communities. So we have a lot of people who work for Amazon and Google and Microsoft, and these are all tech workers. They have a lot of money, and it's reflected in their masajid and what they're able to give their imams. Their imams can function fully in the community, and they can do a lot of things because they have the resources. They can raise $50,000, $60,000 after a Jumu'ah just for housing or something like this. Just by like this. Whereas other communities, even in their major fundraisers, they can't even raise that to support keeping their masjid open. So you the in the West in general, I think the Muslims will have to grow and begin to understand the importance of um, supporting their students of knowledge if they want them to teach. Because a lot of people have this concept, oh no, it's fi sabilillah. You should be able to. So what? The student of knowledge doesn't have a family, doesn't have children that need to go to school, that maybe need to go to private school, that need health care, because we don't have national health care like in the UK. In America, you have to pay for it. In fact, I have an injury now that is costing me out of my pocket, and even the doctors hardly want to see me because of I don't have any health care on my new job right now. So the reality is the communities will need to decide what they are willing to support. Everybody wants all these services and wants a lot of things for free. They want the imam to work for nothing. They want the students of knowledge. Hey, you guys went to study, you should be teaching. Yeah, we went to study out of our own pockets. We sacrificed, did all this. No one wants to even support in the smallest of ways. And I'll give you an example. Me personally, for example, I had my Afidi Institute, and I was really trying to build that. But a lot of people, yeah, we want you to do that, and I want to take this, that, and the other. No support, no support. I had to close it, and really, all I need, the most minimum of funds. So it shows me that people are not serious, and they can find it wherever they can find it, and that's great. If they find it and they can find it for free, I hope, and stuff like this. But the problem is you see, we as a community, we will remain crippled if we don't support our institutions, we don't build institutions, and that means spending. I mean, if you want those services, you want that quality of leadership, you want those quality imam, you can't expect people to sacrifice their whole life, blood, and property to, and you're not there's no compensation because people have to survive. And this is really the West can be merciless in that sense. So
Right.
yeah, we gotta support.
And
Yeah,
as Amar has
financially.
highlighted, yeah, Amar has highlighted, it also takes place, that support takes place in the Sikh communities. I think that there's another inherent problem amongst the Black Muslim communities, particularly convert communities. I want to point to from experience in this regard as well, and that's a refusal to acknowledge leadership, okay, and support that leadership. This is a problem, and even if there's an absence of leadership, that's a better scenario for some of our community members. So if there's leadership, they go against the leadership. If that leadership's removed, they don't have an alternative to push the leadership. They want some sort of democratic conglomerate where everyone has the say so. And we know that that doesn't work in organizations, let alone in communities. And then you may have, conversely, what can be considered tyrannical leadership. Now, part of the criticism that came back to me from that same individual, and I said I'll hold my hand up in that instance. I know when I left to go abroad and work and everything like that, as you know, we had scholars giving fatwa, Abdul Haqq, you can't leave, and that was a lot of pressure at that time. And this individual criticized me, saying, look, there's no school in the area, Brixton area, and they're having to homeschool. We did start a school, my wife and some other sisters, myself, we were the founders. The sisters were the founders of the school. We supported them in that school. The school's now moved to just down the road. It's an outstanding Ofsted school. But as some others have said, it no longer reflects the community. Okay, and when I say the community, it might reflect the Somali and Pakistani community, but it doesn't reflect the convert community. And there's an inherent problem I would proffer, that amongst the converts, amongst the Black converts, there's that age-old problem. And is it something that's been instilled in us systemically, or is it something that's just inherent in us that we don't accept leadership? Now, I will temper that, because for the early part, right up until when I left, I had support of the entire community. The leadership was supported, the infrastructure was supported, and it made Brixton grow in the way that it grew. That suddenly changed when, as I said, there was this, not even vying, no one ousted me from the position, but there were indications that others wanted to do something different. So I stepped back. I've been criticized by other scholars that, well, since you've stepped back, what has effectively happened? Those in power and those in the community, some, not the critique, the one who criticized me, will say, no, it's grown, it's grown. No, the community has become more like those reclusive communities, the Amish that we've spoken about previously. It's become more like that. And individuals and community members are content with that insular perspective of community living as a minority, and a marginalized, self-marginalization to an extent, self-ghettoization to an extent, because it wasn't done from outside inwards, it was done from within, and being content with that. And I'm going to say, Khalid, here, because I'm being very critical, and I would take, if someone said, well, how would you take responsibility? How would you apportion blame to yourself? The only way I could apportion blame to myself would be to, I should never have traveled to Saudi. I should have raised all of my children here. Those who know Quran now, Hifz Quran or read it with complete tilawah, having that experience of it, living in a land where you can go to the masajid, hear the 5 prayers. No, that if that's a mistake, then I've got questions around people's judgment and balance in that instance there, because if they had that opportunity, I'm sure they would have taken it. Even if the scholars would say, no, sacrifice your children and stay in the UK. And I'm sure someone would say, sorry, Sheikh, I need to at least experience that, because I've seen the benefits and everything that have emanated from making such a move. So I'm not conflicted in that regard. And this is not about me, but I'm saying there are others who've had the same thing put on them in that regard. And Amar's correct. Lack of respect for elders. We were like that when we first came into the deen. And those who went away and came back with knowledge, or were getting that knowledge at that abstract early stage, would look down on our forefathers and saying that they don't know anything, they shouldn't be in position, but yet they had the wisdom, coming back to my 4-stage cognitive development framework, yet they had the wisdom of how to traverse society, how to engage with some of the systems of society. And they opened the doors for those who had the religious knowledge to come in and show how to implement that knowledge. But again, Khalid, I'm going to pause there. I know we've got to conclude soon. But again, there are some who have kept communities at a particular rudimentary basis of knowledge, okay? Not progressing them from the abstract founding stages to the more actualized implementation stage of the deen. And you've seen a recycling of the same books, which is not a problem in and of itself, because we've seen how the ulama have used and utilized those books in the Haramain, for example. It's the most common example. And you've seen the individuals, the recipients, the students, the laymen who've attended those classes growing, tadarruj with that aim, comprehending it more. Just like when you read the Quran, each time you read the Quran and you ponder over it. But that hasn't been done in the West by these teachers. And you've got some teaching who are unqualified to teach. So it's no wonder that when you look at the Salafi communities now, in the 90s, we weren't even lockstep. We were leading the development, authentic knowledge, how to grow, what was being done, the schools that were being done, ensuring that the books of authentication authenticity were being there. And we saw Sufis and others, Deobandis, looking at that and coming up to speed in that regard. Look at now compared to then. And I would ask you to show me, I'm looking in the UK perspective, you can probably tell me from the context in the US, show me a community of Sunnah, Salafiyah. Maybe I can mention Birmingham, Green Lane. I don't know though. So I'm going to temper that, because I haven't been here for a long time. Name me a Salafi community that is on or ahead of the curve like some of the communities were, and I include Brixton in that, with scholarly endorsement from around the world, Kuwait, Yemen, Saudi, Africa, African countries, ulama, show me a community that is on or ahead of the curve like those days. But if I ask you to show me a community that is behind with regards to its program, socio-religious, socio-educational, socio-economic, if I ask you to show me communities that are behind or stagnated, we can continue talking for another maybe half hour, 45 minutes of the communities that we know.
Mhm. One thing I want to mention is that insular being insular, like as you were mentioned, that I don't see that as necessarily being a bad thing if you are if you're building. You know, if you're
Yes.
insular and you're away from the society and you're thriving. And our examples here in the West, unfortunately, would be, as you said, the Amish. The Amish, they live their lifestyle. They don't even have technology, okay? And they are still, they're thriving in their way of life. You know, they preserve their traditions, everything. They have those work ethics. They produce future, for them, and they, are preserving their lifestyle. Also, probably some of the conservative or Orthodox Jews, they may also, because they have their own communities and so forth, and they thrive to a greater or lesser extent in various things. Um, so with all of that being said, I think the complexity of the problem. It's so many. There are so many. I don't think those are necessary examples. Allah knows best. Barakallah Fik, Iron Mike, because the issue, and again, I haven't been, but a lot of those communities were still far behind as far as even their institutions, even their building. And in a sense, you can see that they're in some way in the greater scheme of the dawah, they've lost popularity because of, and it's not about popularity, but the plain and simple, they lost a lot of other support because of the infighting and because of their position with a lot of their brothers. So then there's a lot of hatred towards them, which affects resources, obviously. If you're still in the same building and it's rotting out and you barely have a school or what have you, and it's 20 years on, then it's time to rethink that, hey, there are some issues that we need to address, okay, at a minimum. So I think what you said is correct in that we're behind in many respects. But I think the overall Muslim community, even though there's progressive ones and they have these ties and that ties, well, a lot of them, they've sold their deen for
Mm.
those ties. And then there are those who are more in the middle ground because they are blessed with the resources and they realize the importance. But trust me, they have their same issues of the infighting. And I can give you an example out here, a community that has a lot of resources. They have a brand new masjid that is being built now from the ground up because the other one was firebombed, and it's predominantly Deal Bundy, they're Tabliki, what have you. But they've split. They've split. They split for those persons, so they also have those same issues. And then there's the politics, and maybe these guys are. This one is Pakistani, and this one has kind of South African Indian background, and they have their own issues. Okay, that is causing them causing splitting in their community and hampers development, even though they have a lot of resources and they're still able to do things, but it's still a struggle because it's a weakening of their power. So I think all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, and the the landscape might not be the same in America as to with America being so big and the UK being more concentrated, the Muslim communities and so forth. There may be some differences there too, in some of the things that you guys achieve versus what is achieved in America, and and so forth. But the bottom line is we are, the Muslims will have to determine in the future, how they want to preserve their communities because they're losing their identity, they're using their youth, they're losing. And as someone point there, that's a whole nother conversation about the lack of respect the youth. I mean, I'd say it's way worse than that. I mean, there are Somali girls telling their mothers what to do, which is, from the old school Somalis. No, they were like African Americans. Bow. They would, no, what'd you say? No, they don't do that. But now we have a whole different youth with under a different set of threats and the complexity of the problem. So we just have a plethora of problems and issues that we have to deal with as Muslim minorities in the West. Okay, it's just so complex. There's so many things that we keep ourselves back, and it is hard to know to what extent could we, because we definitely have different for those who have the ideologies versus the Sunnah, different ideological perspectives, as far as the Aqidah, as far as this, as far as, and then personal issues and tribal issues. And, we've got a lot of things that make our community weaker and weaker. And then also realizing, hey, that we need to invest in our students of knowledge or invest in our people. We want them to come back. They've studied. We need to have something for them, a role for them,
No, I agree.
um, and
I think,
it's just very complex. It's a lot of things going
and
on
I
there.
think,
May Allah help us and help us to
I
help us
mean,
out.
and I think what I'd say, Khalid, to conclude at this point, if we may, I think what you said again resonates, and I think that we need to look realistically if we're going to now. The program of learning, we know that's something, that curriculum of learning is something that we can never ignore. Okay. However, a program needs to be put down, a blueprint that's tailored to our environments. But alongside that, juxtaposed with that, there needs to be a developmental program of how to grow as a collective in our society. And I don't see that there. Okay. I don't see that. I've not seen that. Everyone shuns that. Oh, it's Ikhwani. No, if you're looking in your community, say, right, what stages are we going to take our children through with regards to education? The young, the old, the women, the men. What have we identified through research in our own communities of what is needed? Okay, what is needed? So mothers, sisters, elderly women, sisters and brothers might say, we need ABCD. Proper research is done on a micro level within the community. That's then gathered, that data is gathered and it's looked at really carefully, because and the people looking at it don't have a cognitive bias. They have an interest. If we need to get outside Muslim groups to come and look at our data, so no one thinks that it's being skewered or corrupted to support any particular entity, then do so. But to gather that data of what is needed from A to Z, socio-economically, socio-culturally, socio-religiously, and start teasing out and aligning all of that data and transferring that into respective planning, short, mid, long term. And that the committee, the leadership, the religious entity, the imam and whoever's with him, subscribe to this because it's come from the community. That data has come, it's emanated from the community. And then you put down this plan to grow with it. And there's an evaluation stage as well. You strategically evaluate what has been strategically implemented. And what has been strategically implemented, I'm going backwards now or forwards, it's a cycle, goes back to the strategic planning. If communities, especially Salafi black communities, and I'm not just looking at blackness and being racist, as some might say, but those that have stagnated and have not moved forward for ages, financially, religiously, or anything else, if that was done, if that is done, at least that will be looking constructively for the future. And I believe that that's a way forward. And if that template works in your community, and then you visit my community, you say, Abdul Haqq, this is what we've done. And we sit down, have committee meetings, we bring it to the community, and you say, this is the template that we've had, take it, do similar research, or tweak it to fit your reality. And we actually start supporting as opposed to competing with communities, other communities, which has happened amongst the Salafi communities. You know that. I've seen it in the UK, in America, and elsewhere. And Khalid, I've talked about strategic management here now, you know, with MBA talk and everything like that. But it is part of life. We all strategize in our lives. And I've mentioned strategic planning, implementation, evaluation. But I want to bring another thing to you, which I've done recently with an organization that I'm working for, looking at the local urban communities. And I've taken another set of strategies called implementation strategy. And I'm going to explain very briefly before we conclude. And I'm looking at communities and saying this is what can be implemented in communities as well. So what is horizontal, what is implementation strategy? You have backward implementation strategy, okay? What is that? I'll give you the example. Starbucks, when they saw that their raw materials were too high, okay, they went back and bought the coffee farms, okay? So they could control that product. They invested in their product. How do we transfer that into our communities? We look at our youth and we properly invest in them, okay? We invest in them to ensure that their development moves along a trajectory or series of trajectories that will prepare and equip them to take over from us and also to lead in society. They don't all have to become imams, but to equip them. Then what is horizontal integration, Khalid? In the corporate world, it's taking over competitors, okay? But instead of doing that, you transfer that into working in partnership with other communities, realizing their strengths and leaning on them for those while they lean on you for yours without competing. And then the last aspect is forward integration strategy. Looking at what alliances you need to make societally. This is me transferring it from a corporate perspective, which is what Amazon did. They found other distributors and they've said, okay, let's work with you or we buy you out to expand their product. Instead of doing it in the corporate sense, we take it within a community perspective, a communal perspective, and we identify paths of development that we need to move towards with the partners that we're working with those we've invested in, with the backward strategy, bringing them to the fore in order for them to take up those mantles and those opportunities. Why am I speaking like this, Khalid? Yes, because our planning does not seem to be so insightful. Hence the stagnation of where we are. So I've brought a lot here now from a point of strategic development, and running through all of those is knowledge, is the ilm program and the stage of development in those programs. And deen is permeating, so the individual's moving from sirah, tawheed, implementation, elements of fiqh, the comprehensive deen in itself, but knowing how and where to implement those aspects of knowledge after having spent a constructive period of learning those particular elements at those different strategic stages. And I'll conclude there. I know it's coming up to Maghrib, when it is Maghrib, and I've said a lot there. What I'm trying to say is that would help us become progressive, not in the liberal sense. It will also help us become resilient because we will be preserving aspects of knowledge within our communities, among our children, among ourselves, in order to move forward and seize upon opportunities like AI, for example, and how that can work positively for our communities as opposed to it being used against our communities, or we are subservient to the services that are being implemented because we just didn't get ahead of the game or we didn't get on the curve with regards to AI, which is the third or fourth industrial revolution. The previous industrial revolutions, we were always victims or subservient or subject to those industrial revolutions. That can't happen now with the AI age. I have concerns about it, but if you've got concern about something, get ahead of it so we can own it, we can control it, we can use it and utilize it to our benefit and not have it brought in amongst our communities and it uses us. And I'll stop there. I won't say any more at this point.
SubhanAllah. High powered. I just want to say one last brief thing in closing is you just said a lot of in-depth in-depth theory and so forth. I guess us seeing it on a micro level in it, even if it's a reformation, reforming one community uh, on the micro level, then that will allow the larger community to hopefully see if they see something is working. If you just have a masjid and you are implementing some of those principles that you just mentioned, and the people are seeing the results, they will come to you. Other communities will want to cooperate with you. So this is one of the ways that you can mirror that success throughout the community, and that's basically where I would say and would end at that.
Jazakallah khair, Khalid. I know we've raced through on this one, but I think this and the first part, I think, complement each other well. And we will be back in a fortnight to mix it up a little bit more, expound on some other areas that all are focused upon our development according to the Quran and Sunnah with the fahm of the Salaf, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair to our brothers and sisters and the contributions that were made. And we look forward to seeing you. The time will be confirmed coming up to the next episode, inshallah. But from me, Abdul Haqq, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Khalid.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of our listeners and the Muslims everywhere and give us all guidance. Ameen ya rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.